Hi, it's Diane, and I like to go for walks and record what I see in my nature journal. I want to do a challenge, and the challenge is to create a page in my nature journal in the style of Edith Holden. If you're not sure who she is, she created this journal, Nature Notes 1906. Otherwise known as A Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. It became an instant bestseller when it was reproduced in the 1970s. So better late than never, 120 years later, I'm going to try recreating her style. But I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm going to use this colouring book of wild birds to help me recreate a layout as a country diary style page in my nature journal. I'm also going to use this book of wildflowers to help me create a version that's influenced by her style rather than a direct copy. But let's start at the beginning. So far in this sketchbook, I've painted sunsets, snowdrops and a daffodil. But let's take things up a level and give myself another challenge. I've admired Edith Holden's nature journal from when I was a child. In fact, it's one of the things that inspired me to draw and sketch. The illustrations within it are beautiful, and I've enjoyed flicking through the pages, just immersing myself in them. Before I begin my challenge, I want to take a look at how she creates her layouts. I'm going to look at the month of April and these beautiful opening pages typical of the whole diary. There's a block of text on the left and a scene typical of the month on the right. The bird takes centre stage, directing your gaze into a typical English country landscape next to these beautiful flower portraits. The pages in this diary follow a selection of layouts. Some like this are solid blocks of text with a row of repeated nature studies decorating the page. Others have botanical studies and notes with a plant portrait on the right. The paintings follow a common theme, butterflies and flowering plants. Sometimes there are 2 pages with a row of studies. I really like these swallows, and the text is limited to captions at the bottom. The text is either poetry or quotes, or as on this page, diary entries. I've seen quite a few of these butterflies. I think I'm going to settle for painting a bird among some flower portraits. And I think I'll skip doing these snakes. Here is a colouring book that contains lots of outlines of birds, such as these swallows. I thought I'd stick to birds that I've actually seen, and this book has birds from all around the world. I don't think it's in print anywhere, but I'm sure you could find something similar. In the end, I decided to use this bird here. I didn't want to directly copy Edith Holden's page, so I thought I'd use a bird that I commonly see and swap it for the bird she used on this page. I took some tracing paper, traced the outline, turned it over so I'd get a mirror image, and then I used some paper called trace down paper to go over the top and add an outline to my page. And this is another one of my favourite books. It's got lots of wildflower portraits in it. I decided to swap out some of the flowers that Edith's got on her page for some flowers that I've seen recently. I didn't trace them this time. I used a watercolour pencil to create an outline. I find it a lot easier to draw flowers. In the end, I chose this violet, a lesser celandine, a buttercup and a clover, because these were the types of flowers that I've seen out on my walks. In fact, it made me think that some of the wildflowers Edith put in her diary actually appear earlier on in the season, and it feels like she's seeing things a month later. Maybe it's something to do with having a warmer climate, I'm not sure. I drew everything in using watercolour pencils in a colour that matched the colours I wanted to use with the watercolours later on. This can help with not wanting to leave a pencil outline. I don't really want to talk about the drawing side of things in this video. I want to show how Edith Holden puts together her layouts and how she creates a scene. So I'm going to move on to adding the watercolours. I'm using these solid Winsor & Newton watercolours. The first thing I'm going to tackle is adding some washes to the background. I used sap green mixed with a bit of lemon yellow. I also noticed that Edith doesn't completely fill the page with a wash. She just adds an area, and I thought this was really clever how she suggested the sky. I used these two yellows, the Winsor Lemon and Winsor Cadmium Free Yellow, to do the chest of the bird. Winsor Blue was also a colour I really liked and was perfect for this bird. I used the outline from the colouring book to create this bird, but it didn't give me much of a clue on which colours to use. So I took a look at how Edith painted some of these birds, and I noticed something. The markings on her bird differed to one of my other books which I use as a reference. She didn't put white above the black line that goes around the top of the bird's head, and I thought this was really interesting. It made me think about the aim of the diary, which was to create something that's pleasing to the eye rather than focus on accuracy. And this includes markings and proportions. If you think about it, the flowers are way too big if you compare them to the size of the bird. But that's not what matters. She's giving focus to the wildflowers. They take centre stage in the foreground of the scene. And in a lot of ways I stopped worrying about accuracy and just really started to enjoy the painting. I did try and add a white stripe above the black one, but it didn't really work. I've never really thought about it before because I see these birds quite a lot, and when I was actually doing this watercolour and wondering where the stripe should be, two of these birds actually flew into a tree near where I live, and it was as if they appeared as if to say, look, this is what we look like. So I'm sure I've got it right this time. It's not until you paint something when you realise how it actually looks. If we try and draw and paint from memory, it would be a lot harder. And Edith Holden didn't have the internet to look at, or maybe that many reference books. She could have been painting and drawing from memory, which is even more amazing. I noticed that she adds an outline to all of her subjects, and in a way I found this a bit easier rather than trying to paint something more realistic without the outline. The outline in the colouring book shows the bird with the wings slightly open as they're folded on the back, and this in a way made it more difficult to add the colour because the wings looked too short, they didn't look quite right. I looked again at the colouring book and realised that the bird I'd copied was incorrectly labelled. It was a chickadee rather than a blue tit. I'd copied the wrong outline, which goes to prove you can't always trust what you see in a book. But then I thought, if Edith can make a mistake, so can I. And I carried on and did the best I could. I used black to do the outline of the bird. I know you're not supposed to use black in watercolour, but this seemed to be Edith's style, and I actually quite like it. It gives the outline of the bird much more definition and makes it a bit easier to paint. I think this technique I'm using here is called dry brushing, where you don't have much paint on the brush and it's almost like using it like a pencil. And then I also glazed some watercolours over the top. The feathers on this bird almost look green at the top. And I mostly use yellow and Winsor blue. Here's the Winsor blue that I used, and it worked perfectly on the wings and on the head of the bird. In some ways I wished I'd not used the outline from the colouring book because it was slightly confusing in how the wings were folded and the tail of the bird. But I think I made it look okay in the end. I think it's okay to paint something that's pleasing to the eye rather than accurate. I'm moving on now to paint this violet. And I painted each part of the scene separately. I don't have a lot of time to sit down and paint, so what I do is I'll do half an hour here and there, and this whole project took me quite a long time to complete, but I really enjoyed the whole process. I outlined the leaves in a darker green, then I used Winsor violet for the flower. These buttercups are actually really delicate flowers, and I enjoyed painting their tiny leaves and small bowl-shaped petals. I used similar colours to what I used before, so that the whole painting looked unified, and I outlined the plant with burnt umber. The clover was done in a similar way. And then it was time to finish the lesser celandine. The final part of this scene was to paint the background, and then suddenly it all seemed to come together. I added in tiny sheep, the shapes of trees, and I did decide to add something in later on, which is a modern addition to the English landscape. It also reflects my sense of humour, but I'll leave that to the end of the video. I originally thought that painting this scene would be the most difficult thing, but it wasn't. When I came to add the text onto the page, I thought I'd use the old-fashioned technique of using a dip pen and ink. And I bought this quite a long time ago but never used it. It comes with an eraser and 2 holders and several nibs. So I tried out quite a few of these to add text to the page. I treated myself to this sepia ink because I noticed that the text on the page didn't look completely black. But then I thought maybe it was black originally and it's faded to this brown colour. But that was the least of my problems. In the end, I emptied out the sepia ink into this pot and gave it a stir because I think the sediment had gone to the bottom. And then I tried to get the dip pen to work and to be able to write with it. But you will see next that I failed to do this. The ink actually splodged onto the page, and in the end I had to go over it with white to cover up my mistakes. And here I'm trying to mop up some of the splodges. I respect Edith Holden in that she must have used a dip pen, or I'm guessing that she did, and she had a lot more control over it than I did. So in the end I decided to abandon the old ways. I also tried to use a fine liner which was too thin. I went back to this very cheap fountain pen that I bought on Amazon and completed the page to the left with that. I copied some of the text from Edith's diary, and it was all about the month of April and some of the days within it, including April Fool's Day. I dedicated the page in honour of Edith Holden, And I made a note that I'd added some modern additions. And yes, some of you may have guessed it, I added a very tiny shopping cart in the background because there's rarely a walk I've gone on where there isn't one of these somewhere. And it's always a mystery to me how they actually get to where they are, because they end up in some really odd places. Anyway, so I thought I'd add a tiny one in the background, just as my little joke. I wonder if anyone will ever notice. Well, you'd think this would be the final result, but the only thing I found that didn't quite work was the very white page in the background. And I've got this distress ink. I've also made junk journals. I haven't made any videos about it, but it's something else that I like to do as a hobby. So I use this distress ink with one of the tools that you can buy to just go around the edge of the page and make it look more antique. It was very subtle, so I don't think I've ruined anything, but I think it adds to that old world look. And now it's time to see the final result.